Welcome to True Echo, where we share real, powerful stories that expose injustice, inspire action, and remind us of the resilience within everyday people. Today's story is one of heartbreak and heroism. A mother just trying to get home, a child forced to grow up in seconds, and a system that thought no one was watching. But one call changed everything. This is more than a viral moment, it's a wake-up call. Watch closely. It was just after 9 p.m. on a rainy Monday night when Danielle Brooks pulled into a dimly lit gas station off Highway 83. Her 12-hour ER shift clung to her body like sweat in the Oregon summer. Her navy scrubs were soaked slightly at the hems, and her muscles ached in places she didn't have time to notice. The silver Honda Accord rumbled to a stop near Pump 6, headlights dimming under the flickering overhang. Danielle let out a tired sigh and reached for her wallet. In the back seat, her 10-year-old son Jallen was buried in his spelling homework, his tablet perched on his knees, the soft glow of the screen lighting up his brown face under the hood of his gray sweatshirt. The inhaler beside him gleamed under the light. He kept it close. Always. Danielle stepped out, stretching just a little before reaching for the gas nozzle. The drizzle hadn't stopped, but it didn't seem in a hurry to pour either. She rubbed her arms instinctively, partly from the cold, partly from the creeping sense of unease that sometimes came without reason. She tapped on Jallen's window. 2 minutes, baby. Grabbing water. Lock the door. Jallen glanced up, nodded, and hit the button. Click. Lock. Danielle gave a faint smile and turned toward the store when she noticed them. 2 officers sitting in a police cruiser idling near the air pump. One of them, older, bulkier, with a red face and a jaw too proud for his collar, leaned slightly forward. The other, lean with a buzz cut and the kind of grin that didn't mean well, sipped a coffee with one hand and cracked his knuckles with the other. Their eyes tracked her like she wasn't a nurse getting off work, like she wasn't a mother, like she wasn't even human. Late model Accord, custom rims. You think that's hers? The buzz-cut one muttered. Doubt it, came the reply. Let's go find out. Danielle caught the first steps of their approach from the corner of her eye. She straightened her back. There was nothing wrong here. Plates up to date. Car paid for. ID in her pocket. She wasn't new to this. Evening, she said carefully, turning to face them, both hands visible. You own this vehicle, ma'am? The older officer asked, eyes scanning her badge, her hands, her shoes, everything but her eyes. Yes, sir. I bought it last month. The younger one moved around to inspect the license plate. Got a report on a similar car, he said. Just routine. Danielle handed over her license and registration without hesitation. Here's everything you need. They didn't even look. The officer holding her papers kept them suspended in the air while locking eyes with her. Riverhill General? He asked. Yes. I'm a night shift nurse. He tilted his head. Funny. You don't look like someone who drives a car like this. Danielle didn't respond. She knew this dance. Knew the rhythm, the code beneath the words. Inside the car, Jallen was watching now, eyes fixed on the interaction. His instincts were sharp, too sharp for a 10-year-old. Without a word, he reached into his backpack, pulled out his phone, and tapped a message. Mom's in trouble. 2 cops. Gas station HY83. Come now. He hit send. The message went to one contact. Uncle T. Then, with quiet fingers, he opened the voice memo app and hit record. The red dot began blinking. He tucked the phone inside his hoodie, under his chin. So, watching. Outside Holloway, the older officer, stepped closer. You got anything in that car we need to know about? Danielle replied without pause. Just my son. He's 10. He's doing his homework. The younger officer leaned into the passenger side window. 10, huh? Looks a little older. That him in the back? Danielle nodded. Yes. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't scare him. She glanced up at the store. A printed paper sign in the window twisted her gut. Cameras temporarily out of order, under maintenance. Holloway noticed her glance and grinned. Well, he said softly, almost to himself. Guess it's just us tonight. Inside the car, Jallen's breath caught. His hands hovered over the inhaler but didn't touch it yet. Not unless he had to. Danielle's voice didn't waver. I'd like my ID back now. There's no issue here. Instead of handing it over, Holloway let the documents drop toward her chest. They fluttered to the wet pavement. You getting smart with me, nurse lady? He said. Danielle crouched to pick them up, knees trembling. I'm talking to you like a citizen, she said. You pulled me over without cause. I cooperated. Maybe she's hiding something, Doyle muttered, inching closer to the driver's door. She keeps looking back at the car. I'm looking at my son, Danielle snapped. Because he's 10. And you're scaring him. 10? Holloway scoffed. What kind of mother brings a kid out here this late? You sure he's even yours? Danielle's jaw locked. Don't talk about my son. Jallen's breathing shifted. Shallower. Faster. The air in the car thickened. His fingers shook slightly as he reached for the inhaler but didn't press it. You want to play games? Doyle snapped. Go ahead. Call someone. Call the goddamn president. Danielle reached for her phone. Before she could hit dial, Holloway lunged. One sharp motion and her phone flew to the ground. You don't make calls when we're talking, he growled. That's my property, Danielle shouted, stepping forward. Then it happened. Holloway's hand slammed into her shoulder, shoving her against the car. Doyle grabbed her wrist. Stop resisting, he barked. Let me go. Danielle cried. My son is watching. He's faking. Doyle sneered. He ain't sick. Look at him. Inside the car, Jallen gasped. Mom, he wheezed. Mom, I can't. He's having an asthma attack. Danielle screamed. He needs his inhaler. Shut up. Holloway snapped, yanking open the rear door. He slapped the inhaler from Jallen's trembling hands. Jallen's cry was soft and sharp, his body folding in on itself. Danielle broke free, lunging for the inhaler and shoving it into her son's hand. Press down, baby. Press it now. Doyle yanked her back. That's resisting. You're hurting her. Jallen wheezed, voice raw. Oh, now the little one's got a mouth too, Holloway muttered, slamming the door. Then the air split. Tires screeched. A black SUV tore into the lot, headlights slashing through the mist. Danielle clutched her son, heart pounding. And from the SUV a figure stepped out. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Clean-shaven. Come. He didn't need to shout. He raised a leather badge case into the air, gold glinting in the rain. Mayor Terrence Brooks, he said. Remove your hands from my sister. Right. Now. For one terrifying second, no one moved. The gas station felt frozen in amber. The blinking overhead lights cast flickering shadows on wet asphalt, and the only sound was the faint wheeze of Jallen's breathing and the hard patter of rain hitting the roof of Danielle's car. Officer Holloway's hand lingered at his waist, hovering over his belt as if his authority might protect him from what had just arrived. Officer Doyle's shoulders tensed, his eyes flicking toward his partner, silently asking, what the hell do we do now? Terrence didn't flinch. He walked forward with the heavy presence of a man who knew how to command a room, even one outdoors and soaked with injustice. His leather shoes splashed lightly in the puddles as he approached, eyes locked on the two officers like a loaded weapon. Let her go, he said again, voice clipped and deadly quiet. Now. Holloway finally let his hand drop from his belt. Danielle stumbled slightly as Doyle released her wrist, and she rushed to Jallen, pulling the car door open wide. His breath came in shallow gasps, and his fingers clutched the inhaler like a lifeline. She crouched, murmuring to him, guiding his hand, helping him press down and breathe. Terrence stood directly between her and the officers now. What you did here, he said, pointing at Doyle then Holloway, was a civil rights violation and excessive use of force and child endangerment, all in front of a witness, a minor, and an audio recording. Doyle's face flushed. We had reason. You had no reason, Terrence cut him off, tone still even but ice cold. You stopped a black woman at a gas station based on her car and the clothes she wore, not on any actual report. You assaulted her, humiliated her, and ignored her medical pleas while her son suffered an asthma attack. This is crazy, Holloway barked. She got loud, she got combative, and now you're trying to turn this into a goddamn campaign stunt? Terrence didn't blink. You're lucky this isn't already in the hands of state prosecutors. But that may still come. As if on cue, two marked patrol cars from Riverhill's Central Precinct pulled into the lot. Sirens dark, lights spinning silently. The doors opened in unison and 4 officers stepped out. One of them, a sergeant with a square jaw and eyes that had seen enough politics for one lifetime, approached Terrence. We got the call, he said. Orders from dispatch. Standing by for your directive. Terrence didn't turn. Officers Brent Holloway and Marcus Doyle are to be relieved of their weapons and placed under administrative custody. Effective immediately. You're not serious, Doyle snapped, stepping back. You're taking his word because he's the mayor? I'm taking his word, the sergeant said flatly, because the victim is bleeding, the child is in respiratory distress, and we've got corroborating video and audio evidence. You're not above protocol. Cuff up. The younger officers hesitated only a moment before moving forward. Holloway snarled as he unhooked his belt and threw it onto the hood of his cruiser. "This is BS, he spat. "Bitch should have stayed home if she didn't want trouble." "You just sealed your suspension," Terrence replied, unmoved. "Keep talking and you'll walk into a felony." While the two disgraced officers were being disarmed, paramedics arrived, red and white ambulance lights flashing across the slick pavement. One woman, mid-50s with short gray curls, approached quickly with a gurney, checking Jallen's vitals, then Danielle's. "Boy's breathing is still tight," the medic said. "Mom's BP is spiking." "Please," Danielle whispered, hoarse and exhausted, her arms wrapped tightly around her son. "Get him to a hospital." "You're going," Terrence said gently, kneeling beside her and resting a firm hand on her shoulder. "I'm riding with you. You're safe now." She nodded, the fight in her finally cracking just enough for tears to pool in her eyes. Not sobs. Not panic. Just the slow release of a night that should have never happened. As the gurney lifted Jallen into the ambulance, he clutched his mother's fingers, knuckles white. Terrence brushed Jallen's curls back gently. "You did good, buddy," he said. "You saved your mom tonight." As they were being loaded into the back, Danielle turned toward her brother. "How did you know?" "Jallen texted me," he said. "And he recorded everything." Her eyes widened. "You thought the cameras were off," he said to no one in particular, but the microphones weren't. Behind them, a small crowd had begun to gather. Not huge, 10 maybe 12 people, but enough. They had been driving by, stopping for snacks, curious about the flashing lights. Now they stood in silence, watching the paramedics close the ambulance doors, watching a mayor stand like a shield in front of his family. Danielle looked back once more through the rear window. Holloway was cuffed, face purple with rage, shouting to no one who'd listen. Doyle sat on the curb, head in his hands. The rain kept falling, but it no longer felt silent. It felt like change. The ambulance ride was a blur of lights, beeping monitors, and the low murmur of nurses coordinating oxygen support for Jallen. Danielle sat rigid in the back corner, still in her damp scrubs, her hand never letting go of her son's. Every so often, her thumb brushed his knuckles just to reassure herself he was there, he was okay, he was breathing. Jallen's eyes stayed half-closed but alert. The medic had already administered albuterol and strapped a mask over his nose and mouth, the hissing sound rhythmic, steady. Danielle's shoulder ached from where Holloway had shoved her, and her wrist was red from Doyle's grip, but none of that mattered, not compared to what could have happened if Jallen hadn't hit send on that text. Across from her, Terrence sat beside the attending paramedic, his mayor's badge still clipped to his belt but turned inward now, as if this ride was about being her brother first. He hadn't said much since they left the gas station. His jaw was tight, his eyes locked on his nephew's vitals as if willing them to stay stable. When they reached Riverhill General, ironically Danielle's own hospital, it felt surreal stepping out of the ambulance on the wrong side of care. Nurses who recognized her rushed to help, wheeling Jallen into the ER, barking orders that she normally gave. Danielle was ushered into a side room, where another medic cleaned her scraped wrist and took her vitals. "You've got bruising on your upper arm and neck," the nurse murmured, her tone both professional and full of pity. "We'll document everything. You want to press charges, we've got it all noted." Danielle didn't answer right away. She just stared at the floor, trying to breathe past the fury, the shame, the disbelief. It wasn't just what they'd done, it was how easily it had happened. In the middle of a city. Under the pretense of routine. Terrence stepped into the room quietly. "He's stable," he said gently. "Oxygen's helping. They're monitoring him overnight just to be safe." Danielle looked up. "Thank you." He walked over and crouched beside her, placing a hand on her knee. "I know you want to stay strong for him. I know you're trying to not let it break you. But you don't have to carry this alone." She swallowed hard, the truth a weight in her throat. "I wasn't scared for me," she said. "I was scared I wouldn't get to his inhaler in time." Terrence nodded, the line of his jaw tightening. And that's the headline they never print. Later that night, after Jallen had fallen asleep in a hospital bed with a cartoon playing softly on mute, Danielle and Terrence sat in the small conference room outside the ER. The air in the room was cool, sterile, filled with the faint scent of disinfectant. The clock ticked quietly above them, every second stretching like hours. Terrence slid a black tablet across the table to her. On it was the recorded audio file, Jallen's voice memos. Danielle hit play. It started with static, then her own voice. Composed. The dull clatter of her phone hitting the ground. The officer's sneers. The sound of her body hitting the car. And then Jallen's voice. That trembling, breaking plea, "Mom, I can't." The slap of the inhaler. Her scream. His gasps. The raw horror of a child caught in something no child should ever witness. Danielle's hands clenched the edges of the table, white-knuckled. Terrence paused the recording. We take this public. She shook her head. It's not about cameras and speeches. It's about accountability. He nodded. That's why we're going to court. The press conference is tomorrow. I've already cleared it with legal. The video goes live. She looked at him. You're sure? I'm your brother, he said. But tomorrow I'll be the mayor. And I will not let this get buried. The next morning, the press conference was held in a plain, windowless room at City Hall. No grand podium, no flag-lined stage. Just a table, a microphone, and a truth too loud to ignore. Reporters buzzed like hornets as Terrence entered. The footage had not been released yet. They didn't know what to expect. Some thought it might be political. Others hoped for scandal. But what they got was something different. Terrence didn't speak as a politician. He didn't stand behind policies. He stood behind his sister. Last night, he began, 2 officers under the badge of this city used that badge as a weapon. They assaulted a woman. A nurse. A mother. They ignored her rights, her voice, and her child's medical needs. He took a breath, eyes steady. They did it because they thought no one would notice. Because they believed, falsely, that power can silence everything. Then he hit play. On the screen behind him, the images rolled. Danielle's body pressed to the hood. The officer's smirks. Jallen's panic. No edits. No music. Just truth, raw and horrifying. The room erupted. Questions shouted, fingers pointing, reporters leaning over desks to be heard. Is it true the victim is your sister? Will the officers be charged? Was the boy hospitalized? Terrence raised a hand. This isn't about family. It's about justice. This city will not protect abusers in uniform. Not anymore. Back at the hospital, Danielle watched the press conference on a mounted screen in Jallen's room. He was sitting up now, pale but smiling weakly. She looked over at him, brushing a hand through his curls. You okay, baby? He nodded slowly. I think so. Everyone's talking about what you did. He shrugged. It was loud. She laughed softly through the tightness in her chest. You were brave. I just didn't want them to hurt you. Danielle leaned forward, kissing his forehead gently. You saved me, Jallen. You saved us both. Outside the hospital, news vans were already circling. But Danielle didn't care about headlines. Not now. Not yet. What mattered was that her son was safe. And that, for the first time, someone was going to answer for what they had done. The courtroom felt colder than the hospital, not in temperature but in tone. It wasn't a place meant for healing. It was built for judgment, for stark truths and heavy silences. Danielle sat on one of the front benches, her left arm wrapped in a compression sling from the shoulder injury, her scrubs replaced by a dark navy sweater that covered most of the bruises. Her posture was upright. Unyielding. Jallen sat beside her, dressed in a button-up shirt and small black dress shoes that made his feet look too grown for his 10-year-old frame. He didn't squirm or fidget. His hands rested calmly in his lap, but his eyes watched everything. The DA setting up the evidence table, the judge reviewing paperwork, and most of all, the 2 former officers seated across the room. Brent Holloway stared straight ahead, red-faced and seething. Marcus Doyle slouched slightly, trying to avoid eye contact. Neither wore a uniform now. Their badges had been stripped the night of the incident. What remained were ill-fitting suits and the palpable air of men who had been caught, not by mistake but by hubris. The courtroom was packed, not with media but with people. Nurses still in scrubs, EMTs still wearing vests, firemen, janitors, bus drivers, teachers. People who looked like Danielle. People who looked like Jallen. People who had lived through moments like hers and walked away without anyone watching. They came not to protest but to witness. The judge entered. A gavel struck wood and the case began. The state calls Danielle Brooks to the stand. Danielle stood slowly. She didn't falter. Not now. She took the oath and sat in the witness chair. The prosecutor, a middle-aged black woman named Lauren Greer, approached gently, offering a professional smile. Ms. Brooks, she began, could you tell the court what happened the night of March 12th? Danielle didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She recited every detail like she had already lived it 10 times over. Her voice was even low, but each word carried the weight of something sacred. Not vengeance. Not outrage. Just truth. I pulled into the gas station around 9:03 p.m. after my shift at Riverhill General. I was in uniform. I had my ID. I informed the officers that my son was in the car. Did you resist in any way? Danielle looked directly at the jury. No. I handed over my license and registration. I answered every question. I told them my son had asthma. I begged them not to frighten him. Were you aware that your son was recording? No. He did it on his own. Greer nodded. What were you thinking when Officer Holloway knocked your phone away? Danielle's jaw tightened. I was thinking that if they escalated things, I might not make it back into the car in time to help my son breathe. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Thank you, Greer said softly. No further questions. The defense attorney rose, a wiry man in a too-small suit with a sneer he couldn't quite hide. Ms. Brooks, he said. Is it possible that your tone, your demeanor, was perceived as combative? Danielle didn't blink. I work 12-hour trauma shifts. I've been screamed at by addicts, attacked by psych patients, and held the hands of dying children. I know how to stay calm. A rustle of agreement from the back row. What about your son? The attorney pressed. You claim he had an asthma attack, yet he managed to use a phone, record audio. Jallen has had asthma since he was 4, Danielle interrupted. He knows how to survive. That doesn't make what happened to him any less real. Greer stood. Objection. Relevance. Sustained. When Danielle stepped down, Jallen looked up at her with quiet pride. She reached down and squeezed his shoulder just once before retaking her seat. Next, the prosecution played the audio file. The courtroom stilled as the voices of Holloway and Doyle filled the space. Danielle's calm tones. The officer's rising aggression. Jallen's shaky pleas. The moment the inhaler was slapped away. The scream. The silence that followed. No one spoke. When the tech from the gas station took the stand, he explained that the sign on the door about camera repairs had been misleading. That morning he had reactivated the system. Did it capture the entire incident? Greer asked. Yes, ma'am. Video and audio. Time-stamped. Synced with the child's recording. With a nod, the DA pressed play on the screen in front of the courtroom. The footage played out again. The jury watched with their hands pressed to their laps, their mouths drawn in grim lines. One woman near the back quietly wiped her eye. Then came the closing arguments. Greer stood with no notes. Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't complicated. You've seen the video. You've heard the child's voice. You've watched a mother fight to save her son while the very people sworn to protect her became her attackers. This is not about poor judgment. This is about abuse of power. And we cannot let that power go unchecked. The defense tried to spin it, calling the stop, standard protocol gone wrong, arguing that stressful encounters often result in misperception. But by now the room had seen too much. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman rose with a single sheet of paper. We find both defendants, Brent Holloway and Marcus Doyle, guilty on all counts. Danielle didn't cry. Terrence, seated a few rows behind, closed his eyes and nodded once. The judge's voice rang through the courtroom. This court finds both defendants unfit to wear a badge in this city or any other. You are hereby stripped of your law enforcement credentials and remanded to custody pending sentencing. Danielle exhaled. Not victory. Not relief. But breath. The kind you hold too long. The kind you fight to keep. Outside the crowd had grown. Not chanting. Not protesting. Just standing. Nurses. Parents. People who had once thought they were alone. As Danielle and Jallen stepped out of the courthouse, someone reached out and gently touched her hand. Thank you, the woman whispered, for not staying silent. Danielle looked down at her son. He's the one who didn't stay silent. 3 weeks later, the echoes of that courtroom verdict still vibrated through the city of River Hill like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Across downtown, murals began to appear, spray paint and soft brushstrokes capturing the moment Jallen stood beside his mother outside the courthouse, his small hand gripping hers like an anchor. One painting showed Danielle in her nurse's scrubs, arms outstretched as if shielding her son. Another showed a badge cracked in half beneath the words, "Not above the law." In the media, the story had evolved from a headline into a movement. Hashtags like #JusticeForJallen and #ProtectBlackMothers trended for days, but beyond the screen, real change had begun to take root. The River Hill City Council fast-tracked legislation long stalled in committee. Public pressure, spearheaded by medical professionals, teachers, and civil rights groups, turned into policy. They called it the Jallen-Carter Act. The law required all traffic stops conducted within city limits to be recorded with functioning, tamper-proof body cameras, with mandatory jail time for any officer caught disabling them or falsifying incident reports. There would also be a civilian oversight board, Independent, diverse, with investigative authority. And despite her initial refusal, Danielle was appointed as a lead advisor. She hadn't wanted the spotlight. But when Mayor Hall, her brother, stood in front of the council and said, "No one knows the system's cracks better than the people who fell through them," she felt herself nod. So she showed up. At the first meeting of the new oversight board, she wore simple clothes, her hospital badge still clipped to her sweater, as if to remind everyone she was still a nurse before anything else. The room buzzed with press and murmurs, but Danielle kept her voice steady. "We're not here to destroy law enforcement," she said into the mic, "we're here to remind it who it serves." Jallen returned to school quietly. No press conferences. No parades. Just a child with slightly steadier shoulders, who now walked past the other kids like he carried something invisible and heavy. His teachers noticed he didn't raise his hand as much. His principal reported he preferred sitting near the back of the classroom, close to the door. He wasn't afraid. He was alert. One day during recess, a classmate asked him point blank, "Are you that kid from the video? The one who called the mayor?" Jallen nodded once. "He's my uncle." Did it hurt? Not as much as hearing them laugh. Later that week, his teacher assigned a project. Draw someone you admire. While others sketched athletes and cartoon heroes, Jallen drew a nurse. The lines were clumsy, the stethoscope too big, but the woman in the picture stood in front of a car, hands open, with a badge at her feet. When the teacher asked about it, Jallen simply said, "That's my mom." Meanwhile, the former officers remained in custody, awaiting sentencing. Their lawyers begged for leniency, citing careers ruined, families disrupted, and media bias. But the public was unmoved. At the sentencing hearing, Danielle didn't testify again. She didn't need to. The courtroom already knew her voice. Instead, it was Jallen who spoke. He had asked for it, quietly on the ride there. Danielle had hesitated, but something in his eyes told her he needed this. Not for revenge, but for something harder to name. He stood at the small podium, just tall enough to reach the microphone, his hands clasped behind his back. "My name is Jallen Carter," he said clearly. "I'm 10 years old. I like spelling. I want to be a doctor. I was in the car that night." He looked directly at Holloway and Doyle. "You said I was faking. You hid my inhaler away. You said my mom didn't belong in that car." He paused. "She does. She belongs everywhere." You could hear the judge's pen stop moving. The courtroom didn't move. Jallen continued, his voice softer now. "I don't want you to go to jail just because of me. I want you to go because maybe if you do, someone else won't get hurt." And then he stepped down, walked back to his mother, and sat in silence. The judge sentenced both officers to 5 years in state prison, eligible for parole after 3, but made it clear the real judgment had come from a community that had stopped looking away. After the sentencing, an older man in a brown sheriff's uniform approached Jallen in the courthouse hallway. His badge was old, worn, the metal dulled by years of service. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, framed piece of memorabilia. It was a decommissioned badge, bent and scorched at the edges, sealed behind glass. "I left the force 15 years ago," he said softly. "When I realized the uniform didn't protect people like your mom. Maybe someday it will. But it starts with people like you." Jallen looked at Danielle. She nodded. He took it gently and held it close to his chest. That night, they returned home to their quiet apartment on the edge of Riverhill. No reporters waited outside. No protests. Just stillness. Danielle made tea while Jallen sat cross-legged on the living room floor, fiddling with a Lego set. The badge sat beside him on the carpet, next to a toy ambulance and a book about the respiratory system. "Mom," he said after a while, "can I still be a doctor one day?" She looked at him, eyes warm. "Baby, you already are one. You kept someone breathing." Jallen smiled faintly and nodded. And then, just like that, he went back to building. By early summer, the city of Riverhill was no longer the place it had been on the night Danielle pulled into Pump 6. New posters filled community boards at local libraries and barbershops. Information on civilians' rights during traffic stops, emergency contact hotlines, and a hotline labeled #inhaler ready for schools and youth programs. It wasn't just about Jallen anymore. It had become about every child who couldn't catch their breath, because of asthma or fear or both. Danielle's life had settled into a strange duality. By day, she was still Nurse Brooks, working night shifts, bandaging wounds and calming frightened patients. By night, she sat at oversight committee meetings, spoke at forums, or answered emails from mothers across the country, black, brown, white, who wanted to know how she had done it. How she had kept her head up. How she hadn't fallen apart. But the truth was she had. Quietly. In the shower, in the elevator, sometimes while heating dinner with Jallen in the next room. Healing didn't come with a press release. One Friday morning, Terrence stopped by the apartment with a coffee in one hand and a thick manila envelope in the other. "You're up for a community recognition award," he said, holding out the envelope like it was made of glass. "From the State Medical Board. First time they've ever issued one for advocacy." Danielle stared at it, blinking. "I didn't do anything special." He gave her a look. "You survived. You testified. You changed city policy. And you helped your son breathe. That's about as special as it gets." She exhaled slowly and took the envelope. "Tell them I'll show up. But I'm not giving a speech." "We'll see," Terrence said with a grin. Jallen had been sitting nearby, quietly reading a book on human anatomy for kids. At the word award, he perked up. "Are they giving you a trophy, Mom?" "I don't think so," she said, tousling his curls. "Just a plaque or something. You should get a superhero cape." Danielle laughed, the sound softer than it had been in months. "Maybe they'll let you hand it to me." The ceremony came and went, small, dignified, respectful. Danielle wore a modest black dress, her nurse's badge still clipped to her coat as if to say, "This is who I was before and this is who I still am." When they announced her name, she walked to the stage not with pride, but with quiet resolve. And when Jallen placed the plaque into her hands, the room stood. But awards didn't fix things. Not really. Because real change doesn't happen at podiums, it happens in daily choices. Weeks later, Danielle found herself back at the same gas station for the first time since that night. Not intentionally. Just out of convenience. She nearly turned away when she saw the pump. But Jallen, sitting in the passenger seat now, spoke first. "It's okay, Mom. We can stop. Nothing's gonna happen." So she pulled in. Same spot. Pump 6. But this time, the security cameras had bright red live recording stickers under each lens. The overhead lights had been replaced with LED floodlights. Even the air felt different. She stepped out cautiously and for a second, her hand trembled. Muscle memory of fear. "2 minutes, baby," she said, tapping his arm. "Water and gas." Jallen nodded. "I'll be here." Inside the store, the young clerk, a white teenager with nervous eyes, looked up from behind the counter. He recognized her immediately. Everyone in town did now. "I saw what they did to you," he said, voice low. "I'm sorry. My uncle's a cop, but he said what they did was wrong. He said your son was brave." Danielle offered a small smile. He is." She grabbed a bottle of water, paid, and turned to leave. "Ma'am?" the clerk called after her. She paused. "Thank you for making this place better. For coming back." Danielle nodded slowly and stepped outside. In the car, Jallen was fiddling with the same framed badge the retired officer had given him. He didn't talk about it much, but he kept it close. On his desk, on his dresser, sometimes in his backpack. "Why do you like that old badge so much?" she asked, sliding back into the driver's seat. He shrugged. "Because it reminds me that even people who mess up can change. Or at least someone after them can." Danielle reached over and squeezed his hand. "You're already teaching people how." They drove home in silence after that. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just rain again, thin and soft on the windshield, like the city was finally exhaling with them. That night, after Jallen had fallen asleep with his Lego set beside him and his badge on the pillow, Danielle sat on the couch and opened her laptop. Her inbox was full again. Emails from small towns across America, people she'd never met but whose stories felt heartbreakingly familiar. She opened one from a single mother in St. Louis. The subject line read, "They said no one would believe me." Danielle typed back slowly. "I believe you. I've been there. You're not alone." She hit send. Because sometimes justice doesn't come in courtrooms or camera flashes. Sometimes it comes in the form of an answer. Summer turned to fall, and River Hill continued to shift beneath its own skin. Some changes were visible. Body cameras strapped to every uniformed officer. Know Your Rights cards posted in high schools and monthly community police town halls. But some changes were quieter, like the way people looked at Danielle Brooks when she walked into the grocery store now. Not with pity, not with curiosity, just respect. That silent, shoulder nod kind of respect that says, "We saw what you endured and we're standing because you stood first." Jallen settled back into school, but he wasn't quite the same boy who had once hidden behind his hoodie during spelling quizzes. He had grown in the way children do when they see behind the curtain too early. He laughed again, sure. He played basketball, lost his lunchbox once, and asked for new shoes like every other kid. But there was a steadiness to him now. A weight behind his eyes that couldn't be undone. One morning in October he came downstairs wearing a tie. Danielle blinked. "You got a presentation today?" He shook his head. "Career day." "Oh." She sipped her coffee. "What are you telling them you want to be? Still thinking doctor?" He paused, fidgeting with the knot. "I don't know. Maybe. But maybe something else too." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" He looked up at her and smiled. "Someone who helps people breathe. Doesn't matter what the job is." Danielle didn't press further. She just stepped forward and tightened his tie, hands gentle. "That's a good answer." At career day, when it was Jallen's turn to speak, he didn't bring a doctor's coat or a firefighter helmet like the others. Instead, he held up the framed, damaged badge. There was a long silence before he started talking. "I don't want to be a cop," he said. "Not because I hate them. I don't. My uncle used to be one. But because someone in a badge made me scared once. Not just for me. For my mom." He paused, his voice stronger than expected. "I don't ever want to make someone feel like that. So whatever I do, I want to be the reason they feel safe." Back at home, Danielle kept working. The oversight board had grown into something much bigger than anyone expected. Cities across the state called, asking for copies of the Jallen Carter Act, asking if she could speak at their summits. She turned most of them down. She wasn't chasing fame. She had patients to treat and a son to raise. But there were some things she said yes to. Like the night Mayor Terrence Hall invited her to deliver closing remarks at a statewide justice reform conference. She stood behind a wooden podium in a crisp navy dress. No teleprompter, no script, just her voice and the truth. "3 words changed my life," she began. "He can't breathe. My son said those words and 2 men ignored them. They mocked him. They hurt him. But he pressed record. He fought back without fighting at all." She looked out at the crowd, activists, police chiefs, lawmakers, teachers. "You don't have to be powerful to spark change. You just have to be present. You have to care. You have to stay when staying is hard." That's what Jallen did. And I'm here because of him. The room erupted in applause, but Danielle didn't smile until later, when she stepped off stage and found Jallen waiting for her backstage, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. "One's for you," he said. "The other's mostly whipped cream. Guess which one's mine?" She laughed and took her cup. They sat together for a moment on the edge of the stage, swinging their legs like they were back on the stoop at home. "Mom?" "Yeah. Do you think people change?" She looked at him. "I think they can." Jallen sipped. "Even the officers?" Danielle thought for a long time. Maybe not all of them. But maybe the ones watching. The ones listening. Jallen nodded. "Then it was worth it, right?" Danielle turned to him, placed her hand over his. "Baby, the fact that we're here at all means it was worth everything. The world wouldn't go back to the way it was. Not for Danielle. Not for Jallen. Not for Riverhill. But maybe, just maybe, it would go forward a little better." And in that slow, stubborn march toward justice, sometimes a single voice, pressed against fear, pressed against a hoodie, pressed against a mother's scream, is the first step. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive in a courtroom. It starts in the backseat of a car, in the pocket of a frightened child, with one recorded breath. Danielle Brooks didn't set out to become a symbol. Jallen didn't plan to be a hero. But together they sparked a conversation, and then a transformation. As Danielle once said, "You don't have to be powerful to spark change. You just have to care." If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of what resilience looks like. Comment below with your thoughts or experiences. We read every word. And subscribe to True Echo to hear more stories that amplify the voices that matter.